Okay, hi. I think I should be audible. Before we start, I just like to make sure everyone is hearing complete. So, OG, are you guys hearing complete? The mic won't be times on the chat box. Since I will probably be a bit more preoccupied with like observing and absorbing and writing down the notes for the debate, as will the other judges as well. Dynamics of the debate that will also probably enhances your performances as well. This is probably a bit, like unnecessary and etc. Because we can just start right now, but just to acknowledge like the presence of the panel as well. I would like to give the floor to each of the panel members to introduce themselves, starting from the alphabetical order that is showing on the tab. So that would probably be Kagif. So yeah, Kagif, you can start introducing yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Gifari. Good luck for the grand finals.
Ilham.
Hello, I'm Ilham. Good luck for the GF.
Okay. Mona or Maria? Actually, my bad. Maria dulu. Maria
Hi
Rubet.
guys, this is Maria. Okay, this is Maria. I hope you guys have a great debate.
And lastly,
Hi everyone, this is Mona, and best of luck for everyone.
okay, thank you so much. We will be judging as a five-man panel, so please refer to us all as the panel at large. And right, without further ado, we can begin. I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to deliver the first speech of this grand final round. Here.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, audible, visible.
All right, I'll begin my speech in three, two, and one. Honorable Speaker, esteemed judges, and everyone in this house. Know what's ironic is that every time a country drowns, whether it's from a flood or an economic collapse, the first thing the world asks is not how can we help? It is when's your next payment due? And this is the absurd world we live in. A world where saving lives takes a backseat to servicing loans. And we, from the opening government representing Dominus Rex, are here to say, enough. This house stands for one simple, powerful idea that international loan payment schemes must include automatic standstill clauses. It is triggered during major cases. And no, this is not about pity. This is about justice, about basic economic stability, sanity. It's about finally acknowledging the people should come before payments. Let's start with what this debate really means. International loan repayment schemes are basically the rules that dictate how poorer or developing nations pay back money to the IMF, to the World Bank, and private lenders, private sectors. Automatic standstill clauses, on the other hand, are those provisions that, when a disaster strikes, immediately pause debt payments and interest. No negotiations, no begging for mercy, no waiting for creditor approval. Just an automatic humane pause. Because right now, if a typhoon wipes out a country's economy, that country still has to send money out instead of rebuilding homes. Tell me, tell me how that makes sense. Under our proposal, these clauses become a standard part of every future international loan. When a crisis like a pandemic or a disaster is verified by recognized institutions like the United Nations or IMF that payments and interests are frozen automatically. No penalties, no defaults, just fairness. It's that simple, it's that necessary. Now, let's talk about why this matters morally. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yes, the 1948 document, the entire international community supposedly agreed to guarantees the right to life and the right to health. Yet we built an economic system that forces governments to choose between buying ventilators or paying creditors. So during COVID-19, developing nations spent an average of 12.5% of their revenue on external debt service. And that's billions that could have gone to hospitals, food, or vaccines, but instead funneled into repayment accounts. And you call this an international system? No, this is institutionalized cruelty. It is disguised as fiscal responsibility. And these automatic standstill clauses are no acts of generosity. They are acts of moral decency. They make sure no government has to pick between debt and dignity. And this is perfectly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG number 1. No poverty. SDG number 3, health and well-being, and SDG number 17, global partnerships. And these goals mean nothing if countries are too broke to pursue them. So, let's move to economics. Because morality alone should be enough. But fine, let's talk numbers. The IMF's Global Debt Report 2023, it tells us that more than 50 low-income countries are the edge of that distress. Meanwhile, climate disasters cause over $200 billion damages every single year. And that's stated according to the World Bank. So what happens is that these nations get hit, their GDP collapses, and yet the repayments continue. What do you think happens next? Default, market panic, total collapse. And here's the irony. These creditors lose more money when nations default than if they just pause payments during crisis. So why not build a system that actually makes no sense? Instead, build a system that makes sense. So automatic standstill clauses and are not radical. They're like a city in a storm. They keep economies from imploding, and they give both borrowers and lenders a chance to recover. Because, let's be honest, you can collect repayment from a country that's broken. Now, let's talk about fairness. Because if there's one thing that the opposition will never admit, it's how deeply unfair this entire global structure is. I'd like to state the philosopher John Rawls. He said that fairness means building or rebuilding institutions that protect those born in the worst circumstances. And right now, our global financial system does not limit that. It does the exact opposite, right? And the count that this country's least global crisis, the one who did not cause clinics that have changed, triggered the pandemic, are the ones forced to pay the highest pace or the highest price. Because when Pakistan was devastated by floods in 2020, $30 billion in damage, and yet it still had to pay its debt. How can any rational moral system demand that? Our proposal is grounded in the principle of shared but differentiated responsibilities. That's international law language for saying, yes, we're all responsible, but not equally. And the rich cause the crisis, the poor suffer the consequences. And now they are also putting the bill. And that's not responsibility. That's hypocrisy. An automatic standstill clauses level that playing field. They say, when disaster strikes, humanity comes first. And this is our speech. We are the Domino Strikes, and thank you so much.
Yeah, we'd like to thank the Prime Minister for the final remarks. To continue and open the case conference up, I'd like to welcome up leader of opposition. Here.
Hi, yeah, I'm assuming I'm audible. So any of your eyes just raise your hand. Writers and CJ. Yeah, hopefully your eye, but wait, let me like move my notes. Okay, go for me. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. We say that the most important currency, especially when you're facing major crisis, is precisely trust. And this is precisely the biggest thing that countries, regardless whether you are a developed country or a developing country, precisely the thing that you are going to lose when you try to implement this, automatic standstill. Why? Because we say that trust is going to be gone during these types of crisis, precisely in the way that suddenly investors, creditors, and so on will suddenly feel, also surprised that their investments are suddenly gone. What does this look like during crisis? And why does this affect them significantly more than if you just try to pay your debts, your interest normally? I think in general, it just makes it so much harder to get international help or loans. It just sends a super bad signal, like you suddenly stopped like your loan payments of your previous creditors. It makes future creditors um very doubtful, because what if it also happens to me? If it happens to another person, what makes it what would make me different from the other person? Major investors naturally have their own like circle, network, and team of analysts that allows this information and news to naturally flow to each other, and this just causes a chain effect. When you face a shock or crisis, the answer is money. This is precisely the reason why you need actually cheaper and stable loans. But when you actually do this type of standstill, you make it significantly harder for you to get loans. Why is this bad for, developed and developing countries? I think that, one, for developing countries who are technically more prone to major crises and impacted the worst in general, they already have like really bad international rating on credit score for like lending and investing in general. This happens because developing countries are, still unequipped with the proper facilities and safety net to tank shocks, as well as, for example, other developed countries. For example, in Indonesia, we're still very heavily reliant on tourism, which is quite fluctuative on seasons and trends in comparison to like US or China as a country that produces products heavily, and they're less reliant on seasons. But their systems as a whole and their reserves, like their cash reserves, also allows them to tank these type of shocks as a kind of like a shock breaker and buffer from the worst harms. For example, they're able to use their developed countries like China, US, still have cash reserves to be able to stimulate their economy. For example, like how US gave stimulus to people during COVID, or how China was heavily investing in infrastructure during slow season or during COVID. Additionally, these developed countries usually have a much better support system in place that allows them to gain help from other allies in times of need. For example, like cheaper loans from other banks, etc., without going back on their loans. What does this mean? In general, for developed countries, these policies just harm them even more in decreasing their credit scores or make them look less trustworthy, especially when they're able to handle these crises on their own. As in, it's just unnecessary. They, one, already have the proper facilities in place, for example, like having cash reserves and so on, like US and China. But second is that even if they don't, they still have the proper facilities and connections to other allies when they also need the type of help. But it becomes significantly harder when you actually try to tank their credit score because of this. But why is it harder for developing countries, right? Because I think that when this system is actually put in place, it makes it significantly harder for developing countries to even get loans to begin with, right? And I definitely just think that developing countries do need a lot of loans, even without the crisis in of it itself. What do I mean by this? Oh, yeah, sure. But also
Sorry, I have a question about your previous statement. So, if creditors stop
Yeah.
lending after relief programs, how do you explain the continued IMF and World Bank lending after the debt service suspension initiative of 2020? As from my previous statement that I have reiterated for many times.
Yeah, but that's like not preferable as a form of loan. Like what? What? I think my deputy will explain that later. But yeah, where was I? Okay, Yeah. So one, I generally just harms developing countries in two ways. One, I think it makes it significantly harder for them to try to get loans to begin with, even without the crisis, when they're just trying to, when they're still stable and doing normally. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, that these developing countries are significantly much more prone to major crises and actually impacted the worst. And I think that, when investors analyze and see that, like, hey, developing countries are actually much more prone to actually having crises, and that means that they can completely stop my investment from even coming to at all. I think it makes it so much less likely that they will get loans to begin with. But second, even, and this is especially worse when they're having a crisis and they need loans, because that's the only way that they can, for example, stimulate the economy, or even give disaster relief and all that stuff, is when they are unable to also get investment. So we say at best, sure, you don't pay off that 3% interest rate for the next how many years, but the trade-off you're making is that now these types of loans that you can get is like 4% higher or whatever, because because only high risk reward, a high risk, high reward type loans will be available to you. We say that the alternative is significantly worse, because the small amount of interest you had to pay previously isn't even all that much in comparison to the amount of loans you need during your crisis. But you're essentially hurting yourself even more by making it not only harder for you to get loans, which can, one, impede the speed of which, like, stimulus or government spendings you also need to give in time of crisis, because a lot of these crises are quite like time sensitive, for example, like disasters. But second, it makes it much more expensive to get loans, because now the interest rates are much higher, which makes it so much harder for you to basically jump back from crises, because now your interest rates are also quite high anyways. Like, you still need these types of things. All of this matters because investors and creditors, or just businesses as a whole, do not want uncertainty. This is a big risk for them. Who knows when they'll suddenly stop getting their investments? I think this is just a primary thing that they do. Like, they all of them have, risk like analysts. That's the biggest reason as to, for example, why investors like to invest in more stable countries, or for example in really really stable investments, for example like housing, gold, and so on, because they do not like risk. They do not operate on this because it is very uncertain, especially when, as I explained previously, these developing countries are prone to being having disasters. But additionally, it's also very uncertain when investors will be able to even get their investment and interest back, and will start to get paid back even when the crisis is over. So I think this unpredictability makes it so much harder for developing countries to even get loans, and also to get loans during the crisis. Thank you.
We'd like to thank the leader of opposition for the final remarks. To continue the debate, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to the floor. Please proceed.
Hello, everyone. Greetings, members of the government, members of the opposition. Good morning. I want to start with a simple question here. When a country is drowning, literally from a flood or figuratively from an economic collapse, what's the right thing to do? What's the moral thing that we must consider first? Do we throw them a life jacket or do we hand them an invoice? Because right now, the world is choosing the invoice. Every time a nation faces a disaster, whether it's a typhoon, a pandemic, or an economic shock, debt repayments continue as if nothing happened. Banks get their payments. Some creditors are still collecting interests, but the people, they are left to pick up the pieces. That's why this motion matters, because we're not asking for countries to escape responsibility. We are demanding for a system that recognizes this reality, that you cannot demand repayment from a nation that is still trying to bury its dead and rebuild their homes. Let's take the Philippines as an example. After Typhoon Haiyan in November 2013, one of the most powerful storms ever recorded, the country faced $13 billion in damage. 5% of its GDP gone overnight. Like that. And yet, debt payments are still continuing. Imagine having to send millions of dollars abroad while thousands of citizens were still without roofs or foods or any goods that the people needed. That's not discipline, but that's more of a cruelty in disguise as a fiscal order. Or look at the COVID-19 pandemic. Low income nations spent months pleading for relief. The World Bank reported that in 2020 alone, developing countries paid $62 billion in debt. During the pandemic alone, that money could have gone to vaccines, to hospitals, or to recovery. Instead, it went to creditors who weren't the ones gasping for oxygen. Now, some might ask this: can countries just negotiate relief? Sure, but in a much more practical approach, negotiations take months, sometimes even years. While the paperwork moves, some people are starving, economics are crashing, and leaders are forced to choose between saving lives and paying bills and debts. That's exactly what the automatic standstill clause fixes. It removes the begging, the politics, and red tape. Once a major crisis is declared, payments pause automatically. No more penalties, no accusations of default, no endless discussions, just focusing on relief, immediate, humane, and logical. I can already hear the skeptics asking, won't this scare off investors? Won't they think lending is risky to if payments can just stop? And the direct answer is no. Let's be honest here. Investors hate uncertainty, not fairness. Right now, when a crisis hits, everyone panics because no one knows what will happen next. But if these clauses are standardized, if the rules are clear from the start, investors will simply adjust. It becomes a part of the systems, and it is not a major surprise. Predictability breeds stability. And it's not just about compassion, it focuses more on economic sense. If a country collapses completely, no one gets paid anyway. Giving them breathing room actually increases the chance that they will repay later. Look at the Iceland after the 2008 financial crash. They paused repayments, focused more on the recovery, and within 3 years, they stabilized and repaid what they owed. Stability leads to repayment, and desperation leads to default. Now that, again, I know the opposition says this might encourage countries to fake crisis or overuse the clause. But that's what the motion clearly says here. Pandemics, natural disasters, global economic shocks, some of these are measurable events verified by independent bodies. There are no faking an earthquake. Let's talk about the human impact. When a crisis hits, many or numerous people loses their jobs, their homes, and even their loved ones. Governments need every cent to provide relief and rebuild. Forcing them to pay loans during that period isn't just bad economics, it is simply morally wrong. And let's not pretend this is rare. The ASEAN Development Bank says Southeast Asia loses $100 billion every year to natural disasters. Every single year. That is not an exception. It's the new normal. Climate change, pandemics, inflation. The world keeps throwing punches, but our financial system still acts like nothing is happening. So why are we keeping a system built for a stable world that no longer even exists? Here's what this motion does. It gives nations a fair chance to stand back up. It helps investors by creating predictability. It prevents total collapse by allowing temporary pauses instead of permanent defaults. And most importantly, it focuses on what matters the most, the people. Because when we talk about nations, we're not talking about faceless entities. We're talking about farmers in Indonesia or some even here in the Philippines that focuses more on existing or affording their livelihood first before any any unnecessary debt, because this motion suggests that we must put the people first and let's focus more on the what matters the most. That's all. Thank you.
We'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the fine speech. To conclude opening half, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition. DLO.
Okay, am I audible, visible?
Yes, audible, visible to both.
Okay, international finance, I don't think it's gonna be like anything particularly sensitive. POI, do what? Raise your hand, unmute. I will take it. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The most important currency in the world is not the US dollar, the yen, or the euro, nor is it bonds issued by the European Central Banks, IOs issued by individual debtor countries, or other forms of financial instruments. It is trust, like Steffi has told you. For instance, in 2008, when the euro debt crisis reached its worst point and the poorer European countries like Greek and Italy faced mounting debt, what they needed at the point is not really more money from richer EU countries like Germany, but rather trust from the public of these lender countries that they will be able to pay back their debt to the German taxpaying public, right? Because at a point in which the creditors don't have enough trust in the debtor, they will ask these governments to demonstrate their commitment to validate that trust. That is when Angela Merkel's government would start breathing down your neck, asking you to radically reduce public spending and implement all of these radical austerity measures because as a country with piling debt, surely you can't be allowed to spend a lot of your own tax money. That is when the IMF would start sending its consultants to your cabinet meeting to pressure your ministers to liberalize the economy further, to open up your borders to foreign goods and services. That is when your people will suffer because now instead of the government actually stimulating the economy and protecting it from foreign competition, they will be forced to earn that trust from creditors. OO wins this debate because we identify how automatic standstill agreements undermine the debtors' country's ability to maintain the trust during times of severe crisis. We tell you that the cost of forgiven mispayments and undercharged interest is not worth this loss in trust, and we tell you that if these graces were to be provided by the creditors in like the worst case scenario in which like your economy goes completely boom, it would be so much better if it is a proactive diplomatic decision made on behalf of the creditors rather than an automatically triggered legal clause. Three claims, right? First claim, why is it that the most important thing for a country in debt is to instill confidence to its creditors, right? Because people's perception of a country's debt is usually worse than the actual debt. Two manifestations of this. First, international finance institutions will demote your credit score. Like Stevia said, you will have less ability to get investments because remember, companies or like international independent funds like the Norwegian pension fund usually have fiduciary duties. They are legally obligated to consider a country's credit rating before investing. So even if let's say Indonesia can present a case in which, hey, we have this oil prospect, we need foreign capital for you to invest in us, these countries will also look at our credit score and let's say that credit score is demoted because we triggered this clause, and this clause being triggered will demote this clause because ultimately it is an assessment on your ability to pay back credit on time, right? So even if you can present the case that investing in us is profitable, they will opt out of investing in you in place of countries with better credit ratings. This means you also get less ability to get underwriting. For instance, you want to sell off a lot of public assets for cash to pay off these loans or to indeed handle the crisis, you need major international banks to say, yes, we will provide the cash, right? Like at the point in which your credit score is lower, they will have less confidence in you using this cash for good. Again, all of this sort of gets into undermining your ability to actually deal with the crisis and pay off your loans. Before I continue, yes, Klein.
You mentioned that trust and credit rating are the most important factors for countries in debt. But don't you think economic recovery and people's welfare should come before satisfying creditors?
Yes, let's talk about people's welfare then, because this also affects voters' confidence in the government's ability to run the economy at all. Because let's imagine this country in crisis, right? People are probably losing their jobs, struggling to make ends meet. They have a lot of anger and anxiety, and because they have a lot of this anger and anxiety, they spend less on the economy because the mood is incredibly negative. They know hard times is coming. They should not pay off the down payment for a house, get a car, or go on holidays. They should just hoard their money. This is incredibly bad for the economy. And what happens generally we see during these times is that people will look for easy solutions. They will listen to populists like Meloni in Italy or Trump in America, who promises easy fixes and blame externalities is incredibly bad because of all the immigrants who are stealing your job. This affects how much other countries will want to deal with you, right? Think about how South Korean companies are pulling out from the US manufacturing sector because of the 1-2 punch of ICE raids on Hyundai factories and the US government shutdown, meaning they are unable to pay their creditors. Think about how the Greek economy after the Euro debt crisis has become more and more reliant on seasonal tourism because foreign and domestic investment fell off when their credit ratings plummeted and they were unable to develop other sectors of their economy. This means they really are entirely dependent on those British people spending their summers in Mykonos for their economy to run. The flaw in OG analysis is that they believe that creditor and daily livelihood, the way the economy runs on day-to-day basis, is separate. No, these two things are entirely interlinked. Later, I will take another. Second argument, why as a debtor country you should just pay off the interest? OJ is entirely wrong when they say that these governments will be forced to choose between buying ventilators paying creditors, right? We have given you all of these mechanisms by which these governments can get the capital to pay off the interest even during times of great difficulty. They can sell off bonds and instruments to private market investors, both at home and overseas, because these financial instruments are basically guaranteed to pay off long term as long as these governments continue to exist. They can sell off their assets to foreign banks. They are probably still receiving some level of tax revenue and can always balance the books and use some of the tax money to pay the interest. We have also told you that when the standstill clause is triggered, now all of these mechanisms becomes more difficult to accomplish because CNBC will report a standstill clause for the debts of the Indonesian government has been triggered. Those private market investors will have less confidence to transact with you. Two reasons why it is okay to pay to just continue paying. The fact that these countries will have the cash reserves to deal with this crisis means that they will boost investor confidence in the financial institutions of these countries, right? Because these governments are essentially saying, look, leave your money with us. It's fine. We know how to deal with it ourselves during times of crisis. Yes, before 6.
Hello, Audie. I have a question for you. So aren't you simply shifting the blame to people's emotions instead of addressing how poor government policies and harsh austerity measures caused this economic anxiety in the first place? I think that is a
No, I'm telling you
misdisconnect.
that this automatic stance. I'm telling you that this automatic standstill reduces people's ability to deal with this, right? And third, why is it better than if grace is given proactively rather than automatically? Because I think this answers the morality principle coming from South government. Because if the country indeed is so incompetent to the point where they don't have cash reserves, or the crisis is indeed so bad to the point where you cannot deal with this, I would rather have this debt forgiveness be diplomatic rather than a contractual product. Think about it, right? Like, let's talk about the Philippines. The US can always give the Filipino government money to rebuild after Hurricane Melissa. And like, the Filipino government can use that money to rebuild and then use their existing tax revenue to pay off their debts. You get both the ability to deal with the crisis and also like you don't have that political cost of triggering this clause, because again we want to avoid that. We want to maintain the private market trust in this government's ability to manage their money and to hold off onto that money, right? Because that's ultimately how you get a country out of crisis. You still need loans, you still need investments, you still need private actor involvement in your economy for your economy to grow, for you to get tax revenue, for you to eventually be able to pay off all of this debt, right? No country exists without debt, not even the very majorly developed ones. At the very least, we tell you how to maintain this.
We'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for the final remarks. To open closing half, I'd like to welcome Member of Government to the floor.
Okay, check, I'm audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, your preference, just raise your hand. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's see what the opening opposition bring in this debate. They told us that it will harder to get loan due to the credit score, and because the developing country, for example, is completely rely on the seasonal income, i.e. tourism. But why this will not happen to begin with? I mean, the investor have their own rationality to pick which country that they must invest in, right? Because they will risk their money in that countries. Therefore, there will be more consideration and background checking, i.e. the purchasing power of the country, for example, i.e. the economic and political stability, for example, or even the geographical situation in consideration that this country have like for example many natural disaster like Japan, for example. But before they loan the money to that country, right? Since the creditor will also make this agreement with that country, meaning that they have considered the risk and etc. Right? So even if OO concerned that the countries are forced to present as good as possible to the creditors in order to get loan, for example, I think the creditors will also have the ability to do the background checking and whatsoever to make sure that is the government said is true or not, etc. etc. But then moving on to my setup. First is that why this loan scheme can be justified to begin with. 3 things. A, I think once a huge and massive natural disaster happen to a country, meaning that there will be much casualties and victims, right? And there will be much building destroyed and etc. Meaning that the country not only have to spend a lot of money to help its citizens to recover, but also the economic circulation of the country will be slowing down due to the people lost their assets and have to focus on recovering all their assets first, right? Then B, for the countries that give loan, for example, or the creditors, when they accept this without giving any interest, or like, for example, will be paused to be at the end of the day, it will create better connection with the other countries, with the creditors that give loan. But then C, since this has been through an agreement, meaning that it is already based on the consent of any parties involved, and there was already irrational consideration in which the countries have the ability to pay the debt sooner or later because they have to discuss and negotiate the economic ability of the countries after facing a major crisis, right? Therefore, I think even if, like for example, opening opposition want to argue that want to argue that the creditors, the country will not have the ability, like for example, to get a credit loan, for example, at the end of the day. But I think since to begin with, they already have an agreement and create a lot of discussion, negotiation, meaning that the creditors, to begin with, already understand with the risk when they are going to invest their money in that countries, right? But then two layers of arguments. One, why this will help the impacted countries of major crisis, and why is it okay for the creditors at the end of the day? But the first argument then, I have told you that major crisis will not only a small crisis that only affect a small particular area of the country, right? But it kind of affecting huge area. Like for example, a lot of provinces, like for example, tsunami Aceh, for example, meaning that there will be much casualties, victims, and also a lot of assets that in that region will be destroyed also, right? But then second, what will happen to the government of the country then? Government of the country, of course, will put a lot of their attention to the crisis. All of the funding from APBN, for example, that have been distributed to other important things will be cut and will be reallocated to the crisis, like what happened in pandemic, for example. Meaning that funding that should be invested to important sector to maintaining the stability and establishment of the country will not be effective anymore. Simply, they have been reduced and reallocated to solve the crisis. But then lastly, if the impact of the crisis is very, very massive at the end of the day, meaning that the countries must find other alternative funding outside their APBN, right? That's why that's why those countries will have possibilities to add more debt in order to keep their country stable. For those analysis, we think it will be very harmful for the country if at the same time they have to pay their debt to the creditors because they have to spend more money, right? In which in the future, they will less likely to be able to repay their debt. And even if they are able to pay back, the countries will consider not to have an agreement with the creditors anymore because they don't want to consider, because the creditor don't want to consider the situation of the country during the crisis. But then, why is it okay for the creditor to begin with? They have been through a long process of background checking, already understand the risk, right? Already have been through a long negotiation, long discussion, and etc. to consider what will happen if, like for example, that major crisis impacted. That's why before going to take this loan agreement, they already understand the risks that they will their interest will be paused automatically and etc. But then even if the loan will be paused at the end of the day, it will still okay for the creditor. One, the countries will still pay their debt after the crisis, right? Even if it takes a long time to be paid, it's still okay, simply because the creditors still have other guarantee, right? That's why, that's why in the loan agreement, there will always discussion that what if you cannot pay back your debt, meaning that you have to pay with the other things. That's why, for example, like what China always did. The moment that you cannot pay back your debt, meaning that there will be certain or particular infrastructure that they have to take for a period of time. But then, why loan will be still got by the countries? I think the creditors will still also want to find out, like for example, still want to find out customers, right? That's why since like for example this country like still able to pay back their debt after the major crisis, meaning that there's still possibility for this creditor to give our interest or any kind of debt, right? But then second of all, I think even if for example the credit the loan that the creditors will give at the end of the day to the countries, which and the country will get like lower score, for example, like the OO concern, I think it's still okay, simply because, like for example, the investor will still come to that country simply because if, like for example, the developing countries have something potential natural, like for example, natural resources, for example, or the other things that have potential in their country, meaning that the creditors will still see this as the opportunity that the moment I impasse this, if they cannot pay back their debt, meaning that I still can, like for example, take other things from their country, like for example, you can just pay back with your natural resources and whatsoever. Yeah, very proud to propose.
We'd like to thank the member of government for the kind remarks. To continue the debate, I'd like to welcome member of opposition to the floor.
Yeah, okay. A second, I want to submit. Wait, Pioli just raised hand. Gonna start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Since the establishment of the Bretton Woods system, which created IMF and World Bank, amid global financial structure was designed to ensure predictability and mutual accountability. That's why I think debtor nations were never treated as helpless victims, but as economic partners who earned respect without their willingness to pay and their commitment to uphold international relation like that. Therefore, I think we wanted to talk about the morality of debt. It must be based on consent, not charity or forgiveness like that. Our explanation only stop in we wanted to save the Trust's credit score, but never taught you how that country who is vulnerable have natural wealth but medium quality in human capital must be productive in our side of the house. That's what we are contributive in CO side. Also another things, I think CG is wrong stance. Because of what? They wanted to support our side. Why? Their BOP must give the analysis why in their side can be justified not to pay the loan and interest rate because the major crisis is like OG already did. That's why I think the moral foundation of debt lies not in competition but in commitment or honor. When a country borrow money, it conclusively enters into a contract based on mutual with guarantee like in CO side. That's why when CJ said, oh, they wanted to have a guarantee because they wanted to pay back like that, it's one side. Because of what? I think with the understanding of the repayment is a promise, not an option. That's why I think the principle is simple. In our side, I trust you, I keep your word, automatic standstill, close the risk the process of moral negotiation and accountability. That's why it will be forcing one side to bear all the risks without consent. That's why in our side we wanted to have a consent before you can post the repayment like that. That's why we are better. But I think the concept of automatic standstill close the fundamentally destroy both moral and systemic foundation. Why? Because of what? I think since the post-World War II era, the global financial architecture was being built on mutual consent and negotiation like that. Institutions like IMF, World Bank were never designed to act out as automatic savior like in OG side, but as a regulation that preserve global discipline through processes and evaluation, negotiation, and conditional support like that. That's why I think when a standstill is triggered automatically, it erases the moral and historical logic like that. That's why I think undermining the very reason that this institution exists, it will kill the principle of responsibility like that. That's why I think that has never been a form of exploitation like that. It has always been a form of mutualism like that. It looks like during the Marshall Plan era after the World War, Western Europe recovered not because its debt were forgiven, but because it maintained base cooperation with the US like that and international institution. I think the bitter nation contribute real value, market reconstruction, research, and labor creating mutually beneficial relationship. This strengthen global stability, automatic standstill, because however, it disrupt dynamic into one-side relationship that undermine the moral standing of the bitter nation themselves. I think because of what? How the productivity can happen in our side of the host. I think developing countries such as Indonesia, the Democratic of Congo, Zambia, and Papua New Guinea, etc., possess immense natural wealth ranging from nickel and copper to cobalt and gold, but often lack of capital and human research necessary to manage them effectively. This is never explained by OO, that's why CO better than OO. Because of what? I think this productivity is the prerequisite how you can be free for the loan itself. That's why I think this nation first face a structural gap. They are rich in raw material, but poor in the technological expertise and industrial capacity required to transform those research into the sustained economic value. In this context, I think foreign investment and international loan become the crucial driver to national productivity. Why? I think the extractive sector provide clear evidence on this dynamic like that. Project looks like Garsberg mine operated by Freeport Indonesia and Indonesia Marawali Industrial Park demonstrative how the infusion of external financing and technical capacity not only boost industrial output but also foster the long-term human development through technology transfer and local workforce training. International loans, therefore, are not instrument of exploitation, but it looks like a strategy enabler for building productivity and in supporting infrastructure in like that in our side. That's why I think, because of the guarantee, it can be possible to make a mutualism contract in our side. Because of what? Even in the very worst case, if you cannot pay that loan, you can take that guarantee, so you can still have mutualism in that debater like that. For the example, that word otherwise be impossible to find domestically. This investment have led to research Indonesia refined nickel export, create stable employment opportunity for local community like that. As a productive explain, local worker can gain new technical skill like that, local economic growth, etc. That's why I think even in the very worst case, if your company has taken by China, for example, you can still have the part of it because of what? I think your company has been managed by people who is more capable than you, which is can help you become the productivity, which is can help economic you better. Because of what? I think when you still stuck in, oh, I wanted to take this company by myself, but you are not capable, it will destroy your economic itself. That's why I think it's more better if you have a mutual agreement, if you have contract which just can make a cooperation in another country like that. That's why I think how that local society can be improved in our side because of what? I think it is about the charity itself. I think it is about how that you can be develop all of the people because of what? I think when China take over your company, it is still okay because of what? They will take local society to take a job in that company. It will make you can have a new development skill like that or anything else. Also another things, I think you can get a money, you can get job, you can pay back the tax like that. It means your economic can be grow in our side. By that way, I think the country can so to say can pay back that loan itself. That's why I think loans should be understood as mechanism of creating productivity value, not as instrument or acquisition or dependency. That's why I think when a state borrow responsibility, the funds are not used merely to cover fiscal deficit, but to invest in long-term national capacity building like that. That's why I think it's strategic because we wanted to set the charity itself because of what I think it can create the economic can be better in our side. That's why for to be CO.
We'd like to thank the member of opposition for the final remarks. To conclude the entirety of government event, I'd like to welcome Government Whip to the floor.
Check, am I audible?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. So, preference, you can unmute yourself. Don't type it. I won't hit it. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Thanos. Okay, let's see what the CEO want to bring today. They say that they don't want to suspend the loan payment. They just want to those developing countries, for example, when they have a loan, they have to keep paying continuously even though they in the major crisis. They say that they can be happy because even though China when they cannot pay it, the China take over the companies, they can still bring benefits when they can still hire the local people. I think, and they also talk the commitment between the big country and the developing country when they have an agreement about the loan. I think about the China, the benefit that local people will get when the big country will take over the company. I think the China won't gonna hire local people because because yeah, we can see in the Freeport, the China have a part of share of the Freeport. They don't hire they don't prioritize to hire the local people. They still trying to seek the Chinese people to go to Indonesia to work there because they still want to make their society, the people, to have a welfare life. So it's not just because of China and Indonesia, so they will hire the local people. They will still trying to protect the people. And about the commitment, I think the commitment will still in our side because of what? Currently, I already taught you. When they have the loan agreement, there will be a guarantee. What you gonna give to us when you cannot pay it? That's why, for example, Indonesia, because your opposition want to talk about legal and gold. In our sense also it says Indonesia can give a guarantee about the legal and gold. So with the moment they have those agreement, the Indonesia can focus on on make the economic growth become better. So even though they cannot pay it, they still have the guarantee of gold gold and nickel the nickel that there is give as a guarantee. But in the opposition side, the moment they still paying and paying, what they get, hey, they keep exploited the gold, even the gold because they know it's hard for them to pay and also focus on the economic growth. So in our side, we can focus on one thing. So it can make the commitment in our side. Let's jump to the opposition DOO. DOO talk about the trust between those countries. I think the trust is also exists in our side because the moment the investor help the developing countries, it means that they do some background checking. They will see which country can give their trust. So because of that, they still have. So the moment they choose Indonesia, we will give them the automatically clauses. It means that this Indonesia will give their trust to them. Why? Because they still have a moral to have the moral to think that America helped us. They are our savior. So we will give them our trust. So they will still have some responsibility to maintain the trust because they know it's difficult to find the savior during the lowest situation. During lowest situation. Therefore, the trust that the biggest country get will be bigger in our side. And for those developing countries, since before they're doing agreement, they're doing some background checking. So the investor will consider to give it or not. So the best case in our side for the big for China or USA, they will get a connection. They will be get the alliance with the big trust from Indonesia, for example, because because they know already help Indonesia, Indonesia will help me, and for the developing country, they can focus to overcome the problem, the major crisis, rather than to focus on pay the loan and then to focus because it's hard for them to maintain those things.
Yeah,
Okay.
So you mentioned something about negotiations, but negotiations are probably unlikely to happen because per context line it's automatic. But even if there is, it doesn't that prove our harm that it becomes significantly harder for developing countries to get loans for development?
Okay, do you think that this loan agreement is exist before the major crisis? So this automatically it will happen during the major crisis. So this loan agreement will still exist the moment they doing some agreement. Oh, I loan to you. This is our guarantee, our goal or our nickel. So the moment these automatically clauses happen, it just suspend. It don't stop our agreement. It don't cancel our agreement. So the moment we can overcome this problem, we can overcome this major crisis, we can still have responsibility to pay back our loans to USA or Chinese. So the trust or the guarantee is also exists in our side. Since this automatically only suspend, only stop, if not means cancel the loan agreement. And next, why the OG? Why the CG better than the OG? I think the OG don't give enough explanation why those big countries have is justified to give a loan even though they don't the loan, even though they know they're in the major crisis, it will hard for them to pay back. But the other side, we already explained to you that this developing countries still have a guarantee. The guarantee, for example, go and nickel to give to the USA to as a proof. Oh, if I cannot pay back, you can get our money back. We have opportunity to do that because we focus on our the society welfare at the first of yeah. Proud to
I'd like to thank the government whip for the fine remarks. To conclude the entirety of this debate on opposition bench, I'd like to welcome opposition whip.
Test. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. For POI preference, just raise your hand to the Zoom feature and please do not spam. I will consider to take one. Okay. Yeah, I think there is no disclaimer first. I will start my speech at 3, 2, 1. Let's we see the debates. On the OG side, OG already explained about when we have disaster and major crisis, people are starving and humanity asking for help. Answer this by when the disaster happen and major crisis happen, a lot of people will help you from everywhere, come and help you. So even if you are vulnerable, you still get those help, right? But the second thing on the CG, jumps to the CG. There are two main ideas of the CG itself. The first thing, CG already explained about China already involved in Freeport and don't hire the local people. Answer it by that's okay because their income tax automatic still on Indonesia, right? And of course there's other trade-off like technological and the income tax also the company tax still got by Indonesia, right? Also there is amount of local people work there still. But the second thing is really that confusing. I'm confused with CG when they said they still have guarantee to pay us within the gold and etc. Answer it within actually this is our case, right? We do have this mechanism that already explained by Bila, my first speaker. CG need to fulfill their BOP, which is if this country face this major crisis, this country not paid anything and return anything and no penalty, right? I think give back the penalty and also give back the guarantee like gold still part of penalty and one prestasi, right? CG is the wrong stance. Jump into the CO itself. Extension. A. The contextualization of status quo that already explained by Bila. The economy instable, the collapsing economy everywhere because we still sweet the things after the COVID-19, the economic growth still not stand and scarcity of the job everywhere, and climate change also can triggering this disaster like flood, tornado, typhoon, and more. Means that this major crisis can happen anytime and means that the current of status quo already that vulnerable. But the B, the characteristic, the country that take the loan itself, this is a very vulnerable, economic unstable, but they do have something to offer like guarantee. For example, before we take loan to China, as Indonesia, we offer the smelter and nickel and Sulawesi, for example, and investment in Indonesia. There's a trade-off because loan is different rather than charity. The country or internal loan it's still one get benefits because they're not charity institution and not voluntary. But see the mechanism then. The mechanism to take the loan itself, you must provide the guarantee before you apply for loan as the thing, as the guarantee, as the debitor and also the creditor will consider you guarantee as in agreeing or loan your loan or not. Example, if you want to get loan, you need to give your house or land to guarantee as you can get this loan money. So our mechanism is really that clear. When major crisis happen, the creditor can get and take the guarantee at the very first place within already agreeing with the both party. There's no harmfulness at all towards this two party. This is the make the identity of CO is pretty much better rather than when likelihood analysis is not feasible when they said the country still not pay off this loan and interest rate and sold just only their asset, but a CEO believe just only take back and also give this guarantee and simply a credit can get
can get and take this guarantee itself. But the second thing is about the manifestation impact towards the actor, towards the creditor. Creditor actually can trust their country, like Bila already mentioned, and can give this loan because this creditor also want the benefit. They earn charity, right, and get profit because they earn charity, and even the creditor is not vulnerable actor. We do admit that, but when their credit don't want to give the loan, so can impact to the debitor, which is the vulnerable actor itself. Even if the creditor is not vulnerable, but they also can compare and also consider their trust towards this vulnerable actor, which is this vulnerable country, for example. But B, debitor itself within the vulnerable actor, the country that need this loan as money to give the progressivity, they can get this loan and this money to build their economy productivity more. Not tools for dependency, like Bill already mentioned in the government when government said mention we depends on, no, we don't depend on, we just give this as the productivity to build the facility like hackway, public transportation and public service that can affect the productivity on the country itself. Like in Indonesia, we do take the loan on IMF and China to build our highway here and transportation. We can be more productivity, right? And but why this country still can hang on when get the major crisis? At least the international institution charity will help you when you have disaster, like I already mentioned before. Like WHO will help you to get medicine, and also if you have the pandemic itself. But any other charity international things also will help you if you have disaster, right? But if you have economic collapse, at least you don't ask to pay all your loan directly, but within the sum that already within the scam that already agreeing in the very first place, within the likelihood analysis, you still get the opportunity to rebuild your country first. And different with government side, that yeah, you directly withdraw all the things on your loan itself, when as the creditor, I do believe I don't want to give my money as to the vulnerable actor because there is no benefit towards me, right? But if you have at least the guarantee itself, at least I get the trust itself to give you money, to give you loan itself, because I do know if you are already collapsed, I still got those beneficial. But the comparison is, and also weighing in class, I think the both government and opposition want the sustainability to the vulnerable actor itself within the vulnerable country itself, within underdeveloped country, for example. The country at least already have these resources like mining, nickel, and etc. But they lack of scarcity, the resources of human resource. That's why we really need those money to the prerequisite to give the productivity, at least to build our facility, to build the highway, to do transportation easier, for example, or even to technological things, or even other things to get of the resources of human increasing, for example. So yeah, government opposition want the sustainability to the vulnerable actor, which is the country that asking for loan, but only in our side can explain why this country can get amount of loan money, because the trust itself, there's the guarantee itself exists, and can build the facility and also economical growth and productivity. This also answer the OG side when they said humanity come first. Yeah, we do also admit that, but also believe humanity need also come within responsibility. Only in our side, both creditor and debitor can also get win-win solution. The credit can get the guarantee itself. That's why I vote for CO. Thank you.
Okay, we'd like to thank the opposition group for the final remarks that conclude the entirety of this debate. Yeah, we congratulate everyone for making it this far. We will be having deliberations, so to autumn maybe. I would like to request a breakout room, and yeah, for the debaters, you can enjoy your break. Yeah, please wait. For the judges, I'll try and confer with Cap, or yeah, that's how we proceed. So like a Okay, to the judges, just to make sure, yeah, since it's 10:15, we'll do the breakout, well, not breakout, we'll do the deliberation outside of Zoom. So yeah, just to notify you guys.
Hi everyone. Since the grand final is over, once again, congratulations for finishing the competition. Please note that the closing ceremony will not be conducted today. The closing ceremony will be conducted in 3rd of November, 2025. So yeah, once again, congratulations for finishing the competitions. If you want to leave the Zoom meeting, that's fine. Since with grand final finally over, it marks the end of the competition. Once again, congratulations and thank you for joining English Expo 2025.